I have presided over thousands of cases in my lifetime. Faces blur into one another, names dissolve into paperwork. Charges repeat themselves like a script the world refuses to rewrite. Theft, assault, negligence, excuses, regret, silence. It all begins to sound the same after a while, but every so often, someone walks into that courtroom carrying something heavier than any legal file could ever hold. And on that particular morning, it was a poor man. I noticed him before his name was even called. That's something experience teaches you, how to read a room before a single word is spoken. Most people enter a courtroom with a kind of nervous structure. They straighten their posture, adjust their clothes, rehearse their version of the truth. But this man, he moved differently, slowly, carefully, like each step required permission from a body that had grown tired of asking. His shoes were worn to the point of surrender. The soles bent awkwardly, as if they had forgotten what support felt like. His shirt was clean but faded, the kind of clean that tells you someone is trying, even when they have very little left to try with. And his hands, I always look at the hands. They rarely lie. His hands trembled, not from fear of punishment, but from something deeper. Something that had been building long before he entered that room. When his name was called, he stepped forward and stood before me. Not proud, not defiant, just present. "Sir," I said, keeping my voice calm, "do you understand why you're here today?" He nodded without looking up. His eyes remained fixed somewhere near the floor, as though meeting mine might expose something he was not ready to reveal. The charge was straightforward. Shoplifting, a local grocery store, bread, milk, a few cans of food. Nothing elaborate, nothing violent, the kind of case that usually takes minutes, not meaning. But I have learned that when something appears too simple, it often carries the most complicated truth. "I want you to tell me what happened," I said. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause that comes from confusion, the kind that comes from deciding how much truth you can afford to share. I took the food," he said quietly. His voice carried no defense, only admission. "And why?" I asked. He hesitated again. Then slowly he lifted his head, and when his eyes met mine, I saw it. Exhaustion. Not just physical exhaustion. The kind that settles into your bones when life has asked too much of you for too long. "My daughter," he said, "she hasn't eaten properly in 2 days. Now I want you to think about that, not as a line in a story, but as a reality. 2 days, a child, hunger that doesn't ask for permission, hunger that doesn't care about laws or systems or paperwork. This was not just about stolen food. This was about survival." I asked him how old his daughter was. 7, he replied. 7 years old, old enough to feel hunger, too young to understand why it exists. "Do you have a job?" I asked. "I did," he said. "Construction. The company shut down. I've been looking every day, but nothing." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a quiet acceptance that things had gone wrong and stayed that way. But that wasn't the part that stayed with me, I often say when I think back on that day. It was what he said next. "I didn't take it for me," he added quickly. "I haven't eaten either, but she's a child." There are moments in a courtroom when the walls stop feeling like walls. When something shifts, something invisible but undeniable. That was one of those moments. Because suddenly, this was no longer a case about theft. This was a case about love, about responsibility, about the quiet desperation that lives in people who are trying to do the right thing in a world that keeps removing their options. I leaned back slightly, letting the weight of his words settle into the room. Courtrooms are built on structure, on order, on the idea that fairness comes from consistency. But consistency without compassion becomes something else entirely. I turned toward the officer. "Was there any resistance?" I asked. "No, Your Honor," he said. He didn't run, didn't argue. He just stood there.
"Did he say anything?"
The officer hesitated for a brief moment, as if deciding whether it mattered. Then he said, "He asked me not to take the food. Said his daughter was waiting." That sentence didn't echo loudly. It didn't need to. It settled quietly into every corner of that room. I want you to picture that. A man caught breaking the law, not asking for freedom, not denying what he did, but asking for food to reach his child. That is not criminal instinct. That is human instinct. At that point, I knew this case was no longer confined to a legal boundary. It had stepped into something deeper, something uncomfortable. "Is there any record of his family situation?" I asked the clerk. She searched briefly, then nodded. "There's a note from a school, Your Honor." She handed it to me. I read it once, then again more slowly. It was from his daughter's teacher. "The child has come to school without lunch for several days. She appears weak. When given food, she attempts to save part of it for her father." I paused, because that sentence, it does something to you. It forces you to confront a truth we often avoid. This was not just about a man stealing food. This was about a child trying to share hunger with her father. I looked at him again. He stood there unaware of what I had just read, unaware that his story had already been confirmed in the most innocent way possible. This, I said quietly, more to the room than to anyone specific, is what happens when systems forget people. Because that's what this was. A failure that didn't announce itself loudly. A slow collapse. A family slipping through cracks that no one noticed until they landed in a courtroom. "Why didn't you ask for help?" I asked him. He gave a small, tired smile. "Who do you ask, Your Honor, when everyone is already struggling? There are questions that echo longer than answers." That was one of them. At that moment, I felt the familiar tension between law and justice. The law is clear. It does not bend easily. It does not consider intention as much as action. But justice asks you to look deeper. What do you do when a man breaks the law not out of greed but out of love? I let the silence sit. Sometimes silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it is the only space where truth can fully exist. Then I leaned forward. "Sir," I said, "what you did was against the law." He nodded. No argument. No resistance. "But you are not standing here because you are a bad man," I continued. "You are standing here because you are a father who ran out of options." I could feel the room shifting again. People were no longer just observing. They were understanding. I turned to the officer once more. "I want you to escort this man," I said, "not to a holding cell, but to a grocery store." There was a quiet ripple across the room. "And I want this court to cover the cost of his groceries today." The man looked up, confusion and disbelief crossing his face at the same time. "And as for this charge," I paused, "I am dismissing it. There are moments when a courtroom becomes something more than a place of judgment. That was one of them. Not because of applause. There was none. But because of the silence, the kind of silence that comes when people are holding back tears. I looked at him one last time. "You must never believe this is your only option again," I said. "There are people who care even if they are hard to find." He nodded, tears finally breaking through. "Thank you," he whispered. But that was not the part that stayed with me. Weeks later I received a letter. Handwritten. Careful. Uneven. It was from his daughter. She wrote, "Thank you for helping my daddy. He smiles now. We eat together every night." I read that letter more than once, because in all my years on that bench, I have learned something that no law book can teach you. Justice is not just about punishment. It is about understanding. It is about knowing when to follow the rules, and when to remember the reason those rules exist. That day, a poor man walked into my courtroom, but he did not leave as a criminal. He left as a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing a judge can do is not to enforce the law, but to protect the humanity that lives beyond it.